Gentlemen, welcome back to the shop and another treat especial. The bumblefuckery continues. We got a schmoo squirter, Automagic, what for old guys with sour, dirty dick beaters. You get to a certain age, do judge me, you need a Marilade. You got a hot young piece of gear, needs some schmoo squirted in a dirty old hole, and makes it easier when a machine can do the work for you. We'll get in without further ado. Oh, look at that. Yeah, hot knives. Prudence, look over there. Open-toed shoes. That ought to get your goat. Fick dich, Milwaukee. Oopsie. Oh, it comes in its own carry bag. I ought not have done that. Now what? Yeah, fiddling with the zipper. It's been as long as I have zippers. You got to get the zipper undone before the main event. Sometimes it just happens on its own. Oh my God. Why you no come? It's absurd that you would rely on a human being's behavior to ensure that your gear is properly lubricated. As a human being, that's exactly what a lizard person would say. No, it's not. We get trained not to say that. It's idiotic that you would make someone crawl into some dirty old hole in order to give it a couple pumps of schmoo. And it's invariably the most difficult one. All the ones that are easy to get at, all the zerks, all the grease fittings, what are easy to get at, gobs of grease. The hard ones, where you gotta send in your triple jointed Filipino 90-pound buddy in there, those are the ones what don't get lubricated, and lo and behold, those are the ones what prematurely fail. And some poor old mechanic got to get, Now these are invariably covered in schmoo. So the butylene overmolding here, this rubber, no fucking good at all. And it ends up blistering and so forth. You'd be better off just with hard plastic. However, it affects the greebling and the marketing wanketeering. You got to look like a space pistol. You know what I'm saying? So this is a grease gun, max operating pressure, 10,000 pissies. Now to my mind, that's a little bit, yeah. This is beautiful though, the maximum operating pressure. That doesn't mean that the operating pressure is 10,000 PSI. It just means that on the label, they have said that the max operating pressure. Let's do an idiot check here. What is that? That's gonna be about 60, 70 thou. So millimeter and a half effective area on this hydraulic system. So pi r squared for the effective area. That's 70 thou. Half of that is 35 squared. 36 times 10,000. 36 pounds. So you got to hold this on with 36 pounds, which is actually entirely plausible. I'm just saying, if it was too much, you know, if you had to hold this on with 200 pounds, it's just not gonna, you know, you're not gonna be able to reef that on there. So actually that 10,000 pounds is plausible. But to my mind, a typical pump action would only be but maybe 4,000 pounds. I believe we tested it before. Got the gland end off here, foreskin peeled right back of her. This spring is critical because the grease is so viscous, it will not suck into the pumping element. It needs to be pushed. So this spring, critical, backing this low durometer pistone, that actually pushes the grease into the pumping element. We got her locked back here. Now this is not new news, but news flash. The guys what are at the confuser designing this thing have never actually used a grease gun, as witnessed by the plastic on the end. You just got to put in some pot metals, some aluminum, something threaded on there, staked and threaded so it doesn't unthread. But speaking of threads, the thread form on this, bloody atrocious. Why? It's so fine and it's razor sharp starts, and then You got to turn the bloody thing like 20, well, no, like 6 times to get it to tighten up. You change that. That's a low-hanging fruit. You change that to a Higby easy start thread, Acme or something, and then 2 turns and she's tightened right up. That's a low-hanging. Give this thing a chance to at least last a season or 2 before it gets thrown right in the fucket bucket just out of sheer frustration. Or maybe they don't actually want it to be used for any length of time on account of they don't get to sell more. What do they call that? Planned obsolescence. Now the body, the cylinder where the grease tube goes, steel and anodized. It's been ground on the OD, likely ground on the ID. It looks more maybe like it's been abraded, wheel abraded or bead blasted or something like that. Fine, pretty fine texturizing, but it has been galvanized on the inside for whatever reason. It's going to be covered in grease. Chances are it's not going to corrode, but they have galvanized it. And I give you a couple little breaks here as a tab in order to prevent this from rotating, so you can get the back end off. And then if you don't actuate the tab, well, even if you actuate the tabs, because of the structure of it, the plastic on a rather polished surface, there's not much friction there. If you really wanted to clamp this, you would have the tab so that it was actuating sort of a band brake, and that way you get a far more effective braking movement than just clamping like that. Clamping like a gear clamps a lot harder than just pinching it in betwixt the between. You see that? But that's just to help you out if you don't want it to come off the front end. It'd be interesting to get in here, because we can use this hydraulic pump as a hydraulic pump. It doesn't have a relief valve, so the only relief is, I guess, the brain boxery telling it it's over chooch. Why is it that the T20 always goes missing? Helps if you loosen that off. We'll get into the clamshell here. Oh, maybe not. Oh, there we go. Now, the thing that strikes me right off the hop, the utter absurdity and ridiculousness of having a 2-speed grease pumper. I guess you want to go slow, then fast. And we got the NSA tracking tag there. It's actually not. It's a magnetostrictive strip, what gets negated by a magnetic pulse. It's two little reeds essentially, and they tingle at the right frequency to set off those alarms when you walk out with them if they haven't been hit with a heavy magnetized. The speed controller, beautifully North American, goes all the way to 15, not just 11, but 15. And I asked our German viewers why some of the German tools only went to 6, why that was. And they assured me it was on account of German ladies as opposed to North Americans. 6 comes before 9. Moving along, we see that this is the Canadian Tacticool version with the black flippy up part and the rifle sling. That's all that does, flip up, and then you can put your rifle sling on there. Wholly illegal in California. And the switch itself is just one of these little tiny tactile switches. However, real heavy detent, nice snap action on that switch, but it is quite a crappy switch, and the trigger bottoms out on the case of the switch. It actually seems quite stout, but you'd prefer the switch to bottom out on the casement rather than the switch itself. No mitigation for the ingress of dust. Well, the switch itself, it's a Marquardt brand, a good name brand, but the application doesn't inspire confidence. You see physically the size of it, but also it's a 125 volt rated switch, 16 amps. And the problem with running AC switches on DC is that AC goes through 0 60 times a second. So it breaks the connection automatically. Whereas DC, you have a whole bunch of angry pixies and they don't want to stop. Is rated for 120 volts, which peak to peak would be peak to zero would be 170 volts AC switch, but it doesn't really matter because what we're worried about is breaking that current. So this likely is only going to see maybe 8 amps or so, and we'll be able to check that if we can get some numbers off this motor and maybe check the inrush current. But I would suspect if and you had a failure, the first thing to check is this switch. Despite their discongruous heat shrinking routine, they've done an excellent job of soldering those. Spared no expense on the soldering, no flyaways or nothing, and lots of actual solder in there. Moving along the pixie path, we will very cursorily take a look at the topology of this driver board. Smartly, they've added an LED. That's the one thing that you do not get with the manual. You don't get any light. And this is very cleverly designed right into the board. So a lot of times you'll see a tool and it's got a secondary board. There's a good cost savings here in reducing the bill of materials count. If you don't need to make another board, router it out and so forth, it's a lot better to have it on the main board. We see the brain box is a Texas Instruments, sort of spun up just to drive motors, and a couple of international rectifier MOSFETs, same part number, in a looks to be a totem pole configuration. A little through hole capacitor there for some filtering, and no heat sinking whatsoever other than the vias on the back of the board. So a lot of times on these things that got to switch a lot, we'll see copper or aluminum heat sinks, but in this case they've just gone and put them on a board what's got holes through it, vias through it, and then a big heatsink plane in order to drop that down. Of course, this isn't a what you call it, a brushless motor, so there's not that much switching. It's either on or off, and there's no speed control. This board has some conformal coating on it. That is a surface layer of plastic to keep the big bits of conductive material, fluids out. It's not here at the top. Of course, they didn't want to conformally coat this tactile switch. I assume that is for turning the light on. And then on the back side, surprisingly, instead of a potentiometer, a cheap potentiometer, it's an actual detented switch, rotary switch. That's a nice little switch there. Celastic applied to the board randomly. I don't think there's any componentry under there. It's just, yeah, why would it be there? When you dig up that celastic, all that's under there is a resistor, or no, an RT. So this little thermistor is simply, it's sensing the amount of current going through the MOSFET. Well, it's sensing the heat generated by that current, and then sending a little signal back to the brain box. If it gets too hot, it shuts down. You'll note it's only on the one MOSFET. It's not on the both of the totem pole. It's just on the one. The motor is a good name brand, Mabuchi. Big old flux ring on there. Steel is real. And it's a brushed DC motor with a sintered oilite bushing at the back. The front of her appears to be the same. It's a nylon, glass fiber reinforced nylon bayonet style stab and twist front flange cover in order to index into the Planetary Gear set. If we have a look for this part number, we will likely find something very similar, but maybe not this particular part number exactly, on account of framing, you fuck. On account of, they might spin up a special number just for big customers like Milwaukee, so that you can't go directly and buy it from a third party. You have to go through Milwaukee to buy it. So we'll just look up this number, and that will give us an idea of how well sized this switch is. Recall 16 amps rated at 125 volts VAC. That AC makes a big difference. Of course, for DC, you have to underrate them because it's not crossing through zero. Lo and behold, we have that self-same number. We actually have the exact part number. And have a look at this. Speed, 21,000 ripplings. At no load, 2.8 amperes. Then at maximum efficiency, a little bit more load, lower speed, it's drawn 20.9 amps. So if I were a betting man, I would say that that switch is one of the components what fails, for one of the electrical components, what fails first, because it needs to break all of that load. Yeah, and the output at max efficiency, 300 watts, and then at stall, all she'll suffer. She'll draw 156 amps. Of course, the battery's nowhere near that capacity. But it's interesting to see how much that stall torque is, which means that that inrush current is quite high as well. Beyond the obvious question of why you would need a 2-speed grease gun, we're going to see how they do it. I guess the obvious answer is to squirt quicker. But the way they do it is on this gear housing, there is a ring gear. So we'll go through, this is a planetary gear set. It's planetary because it looks like planets. The sun gear is the pinion. It drives the planets. The planets are affixed to a planet carrier. And this is an interesting little feature. The planet carrier actually has external gears what mesh with the ring gear. So what we're doing to get the 2 speeds is we're either engaging on that planet carrier against the ring gear, locking it, or we're moving it out of the way so the planet carrier can spin quicker, and then the planet carrier has affixed to it the next gear set, sun gear, and then it goes through another reduction. Of course, you need quite a bit of torque. These little motors don't put out any torque, but what they lack in torque, they make up for in speed, much like my buddy Dewclaw. Where are we? Where's the rest of the gear set? This is not going to go well if I'm already missing that. Oh, here it is. So here's the rest of the gear set. Again, sun, planet carrier, affixed. So it's a triple reduction. Look at that. Triple reduction. The planet carrier is the sun for the next stage. All that's doing is turning this offset crank. This crank, it's all metal injection molded parts, so sintered and then cooked together. It's an offset pin. So as it rotates, it changes rotary motion to reciprocal motion. And then we have a 5/16 rod here, maybe 6 millimeters, something like that, going into a sealed housing. So here's a Buna N double lip seal just to keep the schmoo out. That would be called a wiper. And I bet you the sealing itself is just done through the fitment of the case and the viscosity of the pumped fluid, being almost like a non-Newtonian fluid. Well, it is. In some instances, it is non-Newtonian. That is, it behaves as a solid and as a liquid. You put a glop of this on the end of a hammer and then smack the hammer on something, you're wanting to get it in the face. That reciprocating dingasan to and fro is what's actually pumping your fluid. You can see, here's the output manifold, here's the housing here, and in betwixt the two is a little inlet. That's how the grease can get in there. Yeah, there we go. So the piston is completely retracted out of the outlet cylinder. And we can see here, this is the purge valve. So if there's an air leak, you open this up to allow the spring force to push that grease and pack this area. It's interesting in this gearbox, interesting question mark, that the gear change mechanism is the only plastic bit in a well, the housing, of course, and this would be highly reinforced with plastic or with glass fiber, possibly glass ball, but more than likely glass fiber. And it's interesting that the gear change mechanism itself, that ring, is also plastic. So I ask you, what do you think's going to happen if you mistakenly hit the trigger and while it's going, you change gears? Got our half words back together. There's just one last half of the magnetostrictive strip. And I notice here, very nice molding. However, the material on the outskirts is SEBS. It's TPS SEBS. SEBS is styrene. It's styrene at the end of the molecule. You take blown, what you call it, foam, you know, packing peanuts, any pink insulation foam, and you put a mark with a Sharpie on there, it melts away. So I ask you, is this going to be any fucking good at all? And I will say that SEBS is really good at adhering to PA6, that is nylon. It's good for that. However, what it's terrible at is resisting lubricating oils, gasoline, any kind of solvent like that. Absolutely terrible. So I'm going to use my prescience here and tell you, if this is used in an industrial setting in about 3 months, it's going to be flapping in the breeze like a crack horse piss flaps. Ought to be charged it by now. Just a little wee one coming to kit. CP 1.5. I don't know what the CP stands for. Probably nothing good. Is it pumping? Oh, there we go. Oh, I see what that's for. That gives you a measured amount. It's not the speed. It's how much. Oh, now that's pretty fucking brilliant. Oh, yeah, that's brilliant. Because you tell them it needs but 2. They'll put it on 4. Oh, yeah, what did I say about that strain relief? Fuck. First Zerk I try. Son of a... Oh, yeah, that's got to come off. Old Forky McForkface in Danger Orange. This has not been greased since its last paint job. No, yeah, that Zerk ain't taking anything. Oh. There you go. Next time you walk past your piece of gear you're paying 10 grand a month payment on, and you see iron shavings and sparks shooting out of the pins, at least your operator got a proper excuse. I would have greased it, boss, but I didn't have a battery. Wait for it. Wait for it. Oh, look. So you got the light. That is a nice feature. Also, contrary to that, however, the more complicated it is, the more fucky it's gonna be. You know that a grease gun is, you're invariably fighting with the thing. It's not like working with, it's like bringing your enemy with you when you gotta use the thing. And now you got a more complex system, you got a brain box in there and so forth. It's not just a matter of being airlocked and taking this and fighting with this and friggin' farting fucking around. Now you got to consider, oh, maybe the battery's dead, maybe the connector. The more I set to thinking about this, metering is a fantastic idea. You don't got to count to, you don't got to count to 2 as a 2-pump chump myself. That means a great deal. That is a fantastic feature. One thing I don't like, also the whip is good. Automagic, you don't got a pump. That's kind of nice. On the con side, you need a battery. Batteries don't really work all that well in the cold, despite claims to the otherwise that at minus 18 she gives full chooch. I think that's on the box. Minus 40 ain't no fucking good at all. You got to stick it down your pants to get it to work. That ain't no fun. Thread form on here, garbage. Change it. Plastic tip, garbage. Change it. Switch, and the overmolding, the SEBS overmolding, no fucking good at all. So there are some low-hanging fruit. If you're buying this for yourself, save your arm, probably help you out if you're buying this for a fleet. You won't get too many sets out of this before you'll be calling Granger or somebody else to come and replace these again. They'll be cracked right half in two. Also, there is how they don't last that long, but they get runned over. And when you're looking at a $50 fuck up versus a $250 fuck up, you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying. Thanks for watching. Keep your dick in a vice. Terrible, this grease gun design. It's just greasing in general. It's a useless tool. I ought to know. It's okay. I understand. The bumblefuckery must continue. I got shoulders like a broad. Love is a battlefield and so forth. Yeah. Pat Benatar joke? Nobody? Nobody? The godmother of Lululemon pants? God bless her soul. You can tell love is a battlefield on account of her wearing that Rambo sweatband. Where was I? Lululemon pants.